Well, thank you for being here, and thanks to Club 20 for having us. It's just an important meeting, and we're glad to be part of it. A lot of what we're going to talk about today has been covered this morning, and so you're going to see some of the same pattern. So I think that the story, the reason we're all here, is something that we're all too familiar with. But what we want to do is add a perspective. We've been involved in a lot of this planning, but we're all foresters. We're Carolina Manriquez, Zach Wehr, myself. We work in Northwest Colorado. So we're been pretty actively involved in managing the forests up there. And part of that is working with CWPPs. But that's just one tool in the toolbox. So I want to talk about that. And we're going to sort of bounce off each other here with this presentation. But what I really hope for is some time to talk to you folks and to hear some questions. We heard some great questions this morning, and I was sort of scrambling going, well, I need to change my presentation. But you know what, we're foresters, not presenters. So bear with us. We've got some cool things to share with you, but then we really want to have an exchange, a dialogue, because I already learned a lot just being here today. So again, let's see if I can get the technology. So we're with the Colorado State Forest Service. Colorado State Forest Service in Colorado is actually part of the Warner College, part of CSU. And we have, as you can see, you can read 18 field offices, about 120 employees, 123 as of this morning. That's what I understand. So we're a small organization, but I'd like to think we have an outsized influence. We're all over the state, and our main mission is to assist private landowners. More recently, we've gotten really involved working with our federal partners. And of course, we manage state lands. So all of those combined, we actually do not have any state lands. We manage ourselves. The Colorado State Forest Service is not a landowner. So we've developed, I think, a really strong service ethic over the years for serving the landowners of Colorado. So today's agenda. So I'm going to set the stage, which is going to be the easy job, because I feel like the stage already got sort of set this morning. A lot of us sitting there going, oh, I was going to show that, or something similar to that, because the pattern, as I said, unfortunately, that we're familiar with, we're all too familiar with. And then I'll have Carolina's going to talk a little bit about some of the application of what we're actually doing, and then Zach's going to drill in a little bit more working with water providers. So we've heard some of these statistics today. Roughly 24.4 million acres of forest, and 80% of the population in Colorado depends on those forests for water. And here's just some different pictures. We've seen these earlier today. These are a little closer to home for some of us. East Troublesome is up there. Northwest Colorado got hit pretty hard again, as we heard this morning, with the Mullen Fire, the Cameron Peak Fire, and then the East Troublesome Fire. All what are now being called uncharacteristic wildfires because of their size and because of the speed and to some degree the timing of year that we've seen these. And then we've also heard about what happens after the fire. So after the fire engines have gone home and the snow falls and there's some sense that we're safe again, it snows, particularly in Northwest Colorado. It can snow a lot. It needs to snow a little bit more this year, but it snows. And then that snow melts, and then we get the results that we've seen. Glenwood Canyon pictures were dramatic. That drone footage was dramatic. But unfortunately, we have some of those same situations. If you Poudre Canyon, drive up and down Poudre Canyon, East Troublesome, the aftermath of wildfire, the costs don't stop. And that's one of the points that I think really come across here today is we talk about when the fires are happening, there's all these news about, you know, the fire is running $1 million a day or $1 million point something a day. And then everybody goes home, but the costs don't actually stop. And that's where maybe forestry comes in a little bit. So we also saw some mapping, another map showing these fires. We're up there at the top of the map. You see Cameron Peak, East Troublesome, Mullen Fire, all sort of occurring in the same narrow space of time, all sort of uncharacteristic because, you know, prior to maybe 2000, this map would have looked very different. There'd be red spots out there, but those red spots would have been a lot smaller. And they're getting bigger, and something's changing. And obviously climate is, you know, it's warmer and drier, and that's one of the things that are changing. We're seeing a difference in fire behavior. We're seeing a difference in fire size. And, you know, for years as a Colorado State Forest Service, you know, we'd always tell people it's not if, it's when, because we here in Colorado, you know, we all know this, or we should know this, that we live in a fire adapted or ecological areas that fire is a natural part of. So fire is part of our natural ecology. It's just that what we're seeing now is something that we haven't necessarily seen historically, and we're seeing a lot more of it. So it's not if, it's when, and the when is occurring now. And kind of brings us to where we are today, which is what this map represents. And talking about current forest condition, you know, my career is somewhat, I don't think I was necessarily blessed to live through the beetle epidemic, but for the last 20 plus years, I've worked in beetle-killed forests. And we're on the other side of that to some degree, but forest health and the condition of our forests is not where we would like them. And this is also contributing, obviously, to fires. When you see the amount of red and dead in a forest like that, when a fire gets going in that, it's got plenty of fuel to work with. And so our water is at risk. And this gets us to the whole, the reason that this conference is happening. We're talking about particularly that value. There's all sorts of values that come with our forest, but the water value and how to protect it in a CWPP, but really I don't want to just narrow it to CWPP. A couple points I would make where every forest is a watershed. It may not be something that we've identified as the critical watershed, but every forest is a watershed. So in a way, I like to say all forestry is local. So to the person who gets affected by that fire or gets affected by that beetle epidemic, that's very important to them. We do need to think strategically. We need to think on a landscape scale. I think we've been doing that. I think we have some tools that are going to allow us to do it even more. But at the bottom line, we're serving the people who own those forests. Sometimes that's us, the public, the national forest, and sometimes it's private landowners. But in any case, it's all important to those people. So we do have tools in the toolbox. And I guess the message that I certainly want to leave, and then we're going to start talking about some specifics here, is, you know, we're not helpless. And we're hearing this morning about some really some great optimism, I think. I heard the phrase the other day, opportunities for optimism, and it kept rattling in around in my brain today because I'm like, wow, this is cool. And yes, we can do something here. And I believe we will. So this CWPPs is one of those tools, and I mentioned that, and that's actually an old a meeting in the Gould Community Center in Gould, Colorado. It was a prisoner of war camp, and there's a little prisoner of war sign out in the back. There's some forest management occurring here, and looking at maps. We have some wonderful tools. I guess one of the other points I want to make is we do have wonderful tools, and the technology has increased a lot. But at some point, you got to put boots on the ground and look at the reality on the ground. You can do a lot virtually, but we can't manage the forest virtually, and we can't replace experience. So that was one of the things that struck me today as well, is the amount of information sharing that's occurring here, but also when we look at the Glenwood Canyon again, and having people who have experienced this come in and assist folks who are facing the same problems. We're sharing across and collaborating in ways that we maybe haven't as well in the past. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Caroline, who's going to talk about some specific management. I hope we leave enough time for some good questions and discussions at the end. I didn't take up too much.
No, you're doing well. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, part of this conversation. And so with that segue from John, I want to talk a little bit about why is it that we manage? You probably all have ideas of why is it that we manage our forests, right? We manage for certain goals. We manage for ecosystem services, right? All the things we depend on our forests for. So be it water, obviously, water is life, key driver of life, but it's ag, it's our kids, it's recreation, it's all of the above. Everything that we care as a society for somehow ends up going back to our forests and to the water those forests create. So I feel like our role as foresters and managers is more important than ever. And I feel like it's more relevant than ever. And I feel like there's an urgency to do this, and that gets us thinking about the next plan and the next implementation of these critical projects at the landscape level. So we think of ourselves as stewards. We think of ourselves as environmentalists, even though, you know, the theme of our table at lunch was how do we move from thinking of forest management as clear cutting, right? Like there's this, sure, we use clear cutting as one of the many tools John was mentioning that we have as forest managers, but we do a lot more, right? When we think about the health of our forests and the adaptation of those forests and what we're learning. Today, we're learning so much. We continue to learn so much about what we're doing on the ground, how the forests are responding, and how we continue to adapt our management to these changing conditions. So how do we manage? How do we manage? Very basically, vegetation is managed by changing things, right? We think we know how certain forests have grown through time. We think we understand what has affected those forests and how we can emulate some of those natural disturbances so that hopefully we can get vegetation systems to grow to what we would like them to be. Now we use, as I said, several tools to do that, depending on the forest type and depending on the health of that system. Sometimes we need to clear cut and renew chunks of the forest. Sometimes we do mastication. Sometimes it's about replanting, right? And diversifying a particular forest so that we can, again, think of innovative adaptations to what is coming. Bottom line, you know, the spirit behind how we manage also has to respond to our communities, right? And the drivers of our community's needs and the perceptions of our communities of where the risk is, right? Where the critical values might lay. And again, where the priorities are. So it is a cooperative process. We don't manage in a vacuum. As John was saying, we don't have any official jurisdiction over any land. We're here to serve you. We're here to serve our communities and respond to our community's needs. We want to together, right, find ways, meaningful ways to improve the resiliency of our systems. Now, that is not an easy task, right? It's actually a very complex task, because when we manage for one thing, we're inevitably managed for many other things, right? So right now, the focus is water, the focus is fire, focusing on how do we make these systems continue to provide those values around water and around fire protection. But when we manage for that, we manage for other things. So sometimes there's unintended consequences, valuable ones at times. A lot of the work we do for fuel mitigation positively impacts wildlife, right? We renew vegetation and our wildlife is happy. We change vegetation, we might have more water as part of the hydrology of our systems. We might cut certain things and retain our snowpack for a little longer. This is, again, us trying to use the latest science to do the best we can to manage our systems for the long term, right? And think of our systems as large scale issues. John was saying forestry is local, right? Your watershed is yours. And you think of your backyard or not in my backyard, right? But we are part of a much, much larger system that is interconnected in ways that we understand and in ways that we don't. Bottom line, collaborating, communicating, and trying to work together to find some of these answers. So some of those ways we collaborate and communicate is through planning. And I've put up here some of the latest documents coming out of our area, some that need to be updated, right? The Routt County Community Wildfire Protection Plan was done in 2010. Things have changed dramatically in 12 years. Like, I think if we mention water in that CWPP once, we might be lucky. Today, most of our management revolves around water, right? And it's really intentional around these values that maybe we weren't so intentionally thinking about 12 years ago, because drought, sure, there was drought, but we thought we were going to get out of it, right? Now it's like, oh, drought is here. It's here to stay. So again, we need to plan and use the integration, right, of our partners and key stakeholders in our communities to overlap our agendas and missions and find those strategic places in our landscapes that are going to provide for those values so that we can leverage the limited resources we have to do that work. Now, also, as I was mentioning, we're going through a lot of change, right? There's drought, there's disturbances in our forested systems, be it the mountain pine beetle or the spruce beetle now, or the pinyon beetle here in these areas. We continue to see exacerbated effects of natural disturbances because of drought and continued climate change. So as foresters, we need to think about how we might change our forest management with the changes we're seeing out there. And we are really not certain about how our forests will respond. I mean, as some people were mentioning, we're seeing regeneration come back in certain areas. Most of the areas we continue to treat, we're seeing that natural regeneration come back. We're not seeing regeneration in some of our fire scars. The drought is ongoing. Precipitation patterns are changing. Temperature continues to increase. So how those migrations might happen, what will be here in 50 years. We're trying to anticipate, right? We want a forest in 50 years to be providing for water for us, but we're not exactly sure what that forest will look like. And so we have some tools as to how we manage and how we're seeing our intentional disturbance, our management to provide some of those answers. So we can manage for change or we can manage for persistence. And this is a model out of this resistance, resilience, and transition framework that we're trying to implement in a few projects around the Rocky Mountains so that we get ideas of, so in 50 years, we have more assurances as to how we need to be doing this forest management. Again, once we've defined some of those priorities on the landscape through these collaborative processes, we need to continue to work collaboratively to now implement them, right? And that's not easy. I'm sure you're going to hear a little later from Zach, some of the challenges we have in our world here in Colorado, from industry to the forest conditions. We know that we need to think bigger and we need to think across jurisdictions. We are in this privileged role as the middle person where we can bring partners together to think bigger, working with the U.S. Forest Service, working with the BLM on this Good Neighbor Authority program that Colorado has been really effective at using that one tool, bringing the private landowners, bringing our counties, bringing our local governments, our cities, open space, the private side, right? Fire won't stop at the border, so we need to think cross-boundary. Now, obviously, a lot of emphasis has been put lately in wildfire risk reduction because of our recent fire history. And we need to continue to think about how those issues are interrelated, right? Water, fire, forest health conditions are inevitably related, and we need to be connecting those dots and connecting the dots to where these priorities continue to be defined. Like our U.S. Forest Service regional head this morning was saying, well, I understand the fire sheds are in the Front Range, and I understand we need to be thinking of the west side as a priority. We will get there. We know we are a priority, and we are here doing the work. We just need to scale it up and continue to advocate for us, right? Because we are providing the water for everyone else below us in these watersheds. So just really quick, an example here of one of the latest really somewhat integrated efforts in community planning around in Routt County, around the Fish Creek area. So the Fish Creek area is a national forest, and that canyon, that watershed provides for 93% of the water for Steamboat Springs, where we live. There are some redundancies in the system, but not enough to make us think we're safe if something was to happen in that canyon. This picture shows Fish Creek kind of in the middle, and a fire in a watershed north and south of the Fish Creek critical watershed. So there was a community effort around this Fish Creek CWP square, we call it, instead of just CWP, PB, it's the CWP square, and it refers to, it's a community, critical community watershed wildfire protection plan. So we're not only talking about wildfire, we're also adding the watershed component to the solutions and the management practices that we want to do around it. And it was an integrated effort driven by a consultant group, but we have the city, the county, water districts, different, state partners and federal partners, NGOs, working together to establish a baseline, do some modeling, and then define some priorities of what could be done. And that work is ongoing. It's ongoing in the hopes, again, to protect what we think is valuable and critical for our communities. With that, I'm going to invite Zach to take over. And Zach is going to talk a little bit about how, again, some of the bigger efforts that have to do with municipal water supply.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Wehr. I'm the manager of our Granby field office over in Grand County. So as we talked about this morning, the headwaters of a lot of our rivers and watersheds begin on the west side. And in Grand County, I'll bring up a map here, but we're pretty much surrounded by critical water infrastructure, Northern Water, Denver Water, and all of our local communities. That's everyone's water source. So basically, this photo right here, if you haven't been over by Winter Park, there's the Moffett Tunnel. All the high elevation forests basically on the east side of the county, all that water comes down and it either goes over to the Denver water collection system or it comes down to our local systems. So we have obviously a very vested interest in making sure that we mitigate any impacts from potential wildfires. So how do we prioritize? And I'll give you I'm going to provide an example, basically a case study. There's been case studies this morning. I'm going to provide what I think, kind of a Colorado specific, Northwest Colorado specific example of what we've been up to from kind of a boots on the ground perspective, and kind of the different pieces from different agreements and funding mechanisms to actual kind of tactics on the ground that we've taken to prioritize the work. But really it starts with the landscape. So how do we prioritize our landscapes? Well, as we've heard and we've discussed pretty much all day, the scope and scale of the problem is so big that it really takes an all lands, all hands approach, prioritize landscapes to have an impact. So what that means for us is areas of community protection, watershed protection, and forest health. I don't view those as independent, but they're all codependent, and that's where we target our work. That's where we've really moved to. That also requires us to work with all of our different landowners and partners, ranging from private lands, state, federal, and nonprofits to get this work done. So here's a Grand County overview map here that you can see on the east side, but we've had two large disturbances over the last 10, 20 years. We've had high severity fire, the East Troublesome Fire on the north side. And pretty much as John mentioned, the whole Northwest Colorado, everyone that lives here knows we've had a lot of bark beetle impacts over the years. So while the trees have been dead for a while, we are seeing those novel fuel loading conditions as the trees have blown over. And in the East Troublesome, that's really what contributed to a lot of that was those novel fuel loading conditions and arrangements. On this map here, the northern side is all Northern Water collection system. And then the south, it's all Denver Water. And then right smack dab in the middle is pretty much all of our population densities. So how do we view those from a planning effort? Well, we have CWPPs and we've got a county CWPP, 2006. So it's been quite a while since it's been updated. And then we have individual fire protection districts that have their own as well. And then overlay on top of that, we've got watershed protection plans with Denver Water and with Northern Water across the county. So we're approaching it from pretty much where all these values meet. And those are the areas that I'll get into in a second on how we start to prioritize at the landscape level. Where are we actually going to do forestry? What makes sense on the ground based on weather, fuels, topography, these different variables that we're concerned with. This really wouldn't be possible if we didn't have partnerships and if everyone was at the table working together. And this has taken a long time, and it's certainly probably one of our biggest challenges, but it's also one of our biggest successes as well. So I know Christina Burry from Denver Water is going to be presenting on the Forest to Faucets program tomorrow, so I won't go too much into that. But Denver Water and Northern Water have contributed millions of dollars over decades towards physical on the ground forest management treatment. And those have occurred on US Forest Service, BLM, and private lands. So without them, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. And those are directly impacting our local communities as well from a fire protection standpoint. Something unique to Grand County that a lot of our neighbors do have. Routt County, Eagle County, Summit County have wildfire councils. And those have really been a very successful framework to organizing some of these conversations, right? So we can meet with our federal partners and set work planning, but what having a platform like the wildfire councils bring to the table is that they'll bring utilities, they'll bring Trout Unlimited, lots of other people. It's a good platform to meet and for everybody to meet on an even ground and set interagency priorities. Another very important piece to this is the forest products industry. So as a statewide level, we've all heard, obviously there's some challenges there, but in Grand County, we still actually have a fairly robust forest products industry that we simply wouldn't be able to treat at the scale necessary without having product outlets, basically. We've got 5 active mills in the county, and a lot of our good neighbor authority projects that we work with on cross-boundary projects also go to those mills as well. We also have, of course, like lots of other folks, we've got ski resorts, heavy recreation economy that depend on our forests. And then private landowners are critical to this as well, because that's where we work. And a lot of times that's where we require, or to get to scale in a lot of these projects, to get to federal lands, we require a lot of the times private land access that we will secure to get the product in and out and reduce fuel. So from more of a tactical perspective here, I just wanted to kind of show what we've been up to, and it's not a one size fits all by any means, but it might help some other communities, I guess, that are just getting started. So something unique, going back to the mountain pine beetle, is that it pretty much impacted all of our forests throughout this whole valley. So that helped catalyze and mobilize a lot of our private landowners to get a lot of work done. So there's been, what this map's showing in the dark blue, those are all the watershed zones of concern. So basically anything uphill within those blue polygons go into a diversion somewhere and move elsewhere. Well, if you look down the valley, a lot of our ignition sources are down in the valley around the communities. So how we try and prioritize this and what's really led to this kind of connected, cohesive treatment across at a landscape scale is basically overlaying where the population densities are from a fire protection standpoint. What are the fire chiefs concerned with? And then also what are the watershed water providers concerned with as well? So as you can see in here, a lot of these blue areas that contribute to our water supply they're up in high elevation forests, right? A lot of them are roadless, wilderness, hard to get to, very difficult slopes. And we have access down below in the valley. So from a tactical standpoint, in our valley, for instance, we have a lot of prevailing westerly winds. And as we know, fire likes to spread uphill a lot more rapidly than downhill. So for this particular case, we have created on private lands, basically a ring around the valley, the population density from both a fuel break perspective. If fire were to enter the community, there's opportunities to attack that fire, but also from a watershed perspective, stopping that fire mid-slope before it spreads up into the watershed. And that's really where we've kind of met with our partners on that. The forest products industry, as I said, they've been instrumental in getting a lot of this work done. And Denver Water's Forest to Faucets, which is an active program until 2023, which we're looking at expanding into further years, but they've invested a lot of money, obviously. And the biggest thing with that is it's money that can be applied on all different land jurisdictions. Some of our challenges here that I think a lot of folks are gonna, that they will encounter that also lead to successes are long-term interagency planning. And we've talked about this in the morning as well. And we're getting better working in particular with the Good Neighbor Authority. We've gotten pretty robust relationships developed with our local partners. We've moved now to long-term interagency planning. Long-term being sometimes we view it kind of as that 1 to 5 year plan. But long-term is that 5 to 10 plus. Where can we identify in the landscape that NEPA needs to occur in the future so that we can all agree upon this is the biggest bang for our buck. This is a huge one, right? Water commitment water provider commitment and buy-in. So a water provider, Denver Water and Northern Water obviously have quite a bit more money than lots of small communities, and that's the reality of it. But even a water provider being at the table, being able to prioritize and point out on a map, these are my areas of concern, goes a long way to help us as land managers prioritize where we're going to be working. Increasing cost and treatment as we start to see, we work either in harder to access areas or different parts of the state that are further from mills. Obviously, there's costs associated with some of these treatments, especially on the western slope where some of it, it's a lot of fuels reduction in pinyon juniper. There's a cost associated with that, but there's lots of opportunities for that I'll get into in a minute. Anytime we do work, we're creating a future maintenance workload, right? So we're removing mature vegetation to alter that fuel bed, but then there's gonna be little trees coming up. So how do we manage that forest into the future, into perpetuity, to keep it healthy and keep fire risk as low as we can into the future as well? And this was covered this morning, but community understanding and acceptance over by us in the Fraser Valley. One of the fire chiefs gave me a figure that basically any given weekend, it's between 60, 80% are out of towners, right? So, and a lot of us here live in communities like that. And that is one of our largest challenges, is engaging those landowners, as John said, communicating that you live in a fire adapted ecosystem, right? And there's gonna be a risk associated with that. So getting them on board to support our projects in the future. Successes go right hand in hand with some of the challenges, but we've increased collaboration between critical partners. And I can't say enough about the wildfire councils that have been formed through a lot of our communities as being a platform for developing those relationships. Water provider investments, that's been a great success because obviously translates to acres treated on the ground. And as we've highlighted, the Good Neighbor Authority has been a great authorization that we work with with our federal partners to get work done. And we've pretty much all of our work at this point is interdisciplinary work with different agencies as well through that authority. We are seeing some increases in markets and utilization. There is a lot of new technology coming to Colorado that's allowed us to access some of the more difficult acres. One being which is some of the steep slope harvesting systems that are coming to the state. That's allowed us to work. For instance, we worked around Breckenridge with those systems, but traditionally based forestry equipment has a slope, kind of a slope limit to it, right? So then at that point, you have to either bring in hand crews to actually manually do the work, or you can utilize this new technology, which gets that wood out and to markets to be locally utilized. And another success is opportunities for increased education. Routt County has done a great job at doing wildfire mitigation conferences, which bring a lot of partners together, just like this conference, to educate and offer resources, be it fiscal or just educational resources as well. With that, I think we've got, I don't know, maybe 5+ minutes for discussion here. Okay, 5 minutes. Yes, Merritt.
Oh, Merritt's just giving it to me.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Zach. Eric Lubgren, I'm the Community Mitigation Manager in Eagle County, and thank you for that discussion. I know that the State Forest Service recently released its minimum standards for CWPPs, and there's a whole bunch of money coming our way for updates. And as the keeper of an 11-year-old CWPP, what's that going to look like? And how, is there going to be money through furworm, through where do we tap into that resource?
John will handle that one.
Well, I don't have all the answers to that, but I did bring some of the new standards. If you're not aware of that, they're really not, they're more detailed than the old standard. I left some on that back table on your way out if you want to grab one. I think we heard this morning that there is money through, as you mentioned, furworm. There's also a number of other sources along with the work in the upper watershed on the federal grounds. We're gearing up, and it's an exciting time. And Matt McComb said to meet the moment, and we're hearing that, and we're getting ready to meet the moment. So CWPPs should be living documents. We had a number of them. You know, that this was forest. The Healthy Forest Restoration Act is when they first started coming about. They're community driven, but they have a technical edge to them too. And it's really the meeting of those two things, right? It's the community values. And since they were first written, we have so much more technology and LiDAR and all these other things that are informing us. But again, one of my things is, yes, that's helpful. You still have to ground truth it. You still have to, you know, we do have some great technologies. We're not going to always be able to work on 60% slope. However, I think that we all should be ready to meet the moment. And so identifying these areas, updating your CWPPs is important. DNR has put some money in that direction, and I'm hoping that starts flowing to the communities so that they can do it, because they've gotten to be complex technical documents. They used to be very, very much seat of the pants. I know a lot of community written plans. They're not so much anymore. And I think you're going to see more emphasis, and you're going to see more funding to allow those to get done.
But yeah, unfortunately, we don't have specifics on the exact date when that money is going to be available or how it's going to be dispersed. So
Take one more question.
Yes, hi, Lisa Tasker with Picken County. I was just wondering, what is the typical market for the lodgepole pine?
Any one of us could answer that up here. You know, believe it or not, when we started this, Mike Orndorff's in the audience, you know, we talked about, oh, we have 5 more years. Well, that was like 15 years ago, and we're still sawing dead wood. If the wood and the technology there has increased, if the wood is sound and it's not on the ground or close to the ground, it is holding its ability to be turned into mostly 2x4s. It makes other great wood products, but mostly 2x4s. There's a finite shelf life to it. I don't know, 5 years now, Mike? I'm not sure, but we're still, yeah, it depends on diameter. It depends on where it's been, how much sun exposure it has. It's obviously, it's not gaining value, but it's amazing how much of that it turns into very usable wood products. Now, the other thing we need to get our mind around is that we're going to cut green timber. You know, it's not just about dead timber. In order to manage the forest, we actually do need to cut some of these green trees, because we need to do that for forest management into the future, to create the mosaic out there and to create a resilient forest. It will require that sustained effort, and to have that sustained effort, and Zach hit on it, we need a sustainable industry. We need to have forest products industry, because you cannot pay 3,000 to 5,000 acres indefinitely either. We've got to get to a point where this is sustainable.
I think one more question, Christian.
Thank you, Merritt. Chris Trees from Glenwood Springs, Water Committee Chair for Club 20. You've all talked about the change in emphasis, and that there is a central focus around water and watershed protection. If in fact a CWPP or any organization is interested in maximizing a healthy, sustainable watershed return on their forest health investment, do you have the resources? Can you advise on what forests, or how best to manage your forest for that watershed return? I recall that it was the Colorado State Forest Service that more than a decade ago did a study in the Fraser Experimental Forest on trying to look at the question of harvesting timber to maximize water flows, water returns.
You don't want to. Well, actually, the Fraser Forest was a U.S. Forest Service, but the point is well taken. And Chuck Leaf and some other researchers back in the day did a lot of work on water yields. And it was interesting because I heard the statistic when the assistant chief was talking this morning about needing to treat about 40%. And that number sticks in my mind as a number that, and I think it's just, well, it's more than coincidence, but that was a number that we used to talk about as in order to affect or to see a market increase in water yield, remembering that most water was adjudicated at a time when there was actually less forest in Colorado. There were forests, but they were younger. They had experienced wildfire. And so frankly, there was more water, minus the drought situation. They're just trees are water pumps. They pump water out of the ground. As they get older, they pump more water. They're wonderful things. Don't get me wrong. I love trees, but the point was that about 40% of the, you could affect about 40% of the watershed in order to see an appreciable increase in yield. We've set the clock back. The short answer is yes, we can advise on those. But one thing that all of us as foresters, these are humbling times, and we have to follow the science, and that's what we're trying to do. But at the same time, that's what we're committed to. So there's definitely management. It's not one size fits all. We talked about clear cutting. Not all forest types benefit from clear cutting, and spruce fir, particularly high altitude, can be very tricky. There's some stuff out there about how forestry increases fire danger. And, that's sort of cherry picked information. But in fact, if you make mistakes, you could increase fire danger. You can do things that are counterproductive. But that's what we're trying not to do. And we've got a lot of research going on right now to help us adapt into the future.
So thank you all. Let's give them a hand.